This is a video reading excerpt from Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, Chapter 4, Number 2, The Case of the Hypnotized Salesman. In the book Secrets of Successful Selling, John D. Murphy tells how Elmer Wheeler used Lecky's theory to increase the earnings of a certain salesman. Quote, Elmer Wheeler had been called in as a sales consultant to a certain firm. The sales manager called his attention to a very remarkable case. A certain salesman always managed to make almost exactly $5,000 per year, regardless of the territory they assigned him to or the commission he was paid. Because the salesman had done well in a rather small territory, he had been given a larger and much better one. But the next year his commission amounted to almost the same amount as that he had made in the smaller one, $5,000. The following year the company increased the commission paid to all salesmen, but this salesman still managed to make only $5,000. He was then assigned one of the company's poorest territories, and again made the usual $5,000. Wheeler had a talk with this salesman and found that the trouble was not in the territory, but in the salesman's own evaluation of himself. He thought of himself as a $5,000 per year man, and as long as he held that concept of himself, outside conditions didn't seem to matter much. When he was assigned a poor territory, he worked hard to make $5,000. When he was assigned a good territory, he found all sorts of excuses to coast when the $5,000 was in sight. Once, when the goal had been reached, he was sick and was unable to work any more that year, although doctors could find nothing wrong with him, and he miraculously recovered by the first of the next year. How a false belief aged a man 20 years. In the previous book, Maxwell Maltz, Adventures in Staying Young, I gave a detailed case history of how Mr. Russell aged 20 years almost overnight because of a false idea. Then he regained his youth almost as quickly when he accepted the truth. Briefly, the story is this. I performed a cosmetic operation on Mr. Russell's lower lip for a very modest fee, under the condition that he must tell his girlfriend that the operation cost him his entire savings of a lifetime. His girlfriend had no objection to his spending money on her, and she insisted that she loved him, but explained that she could never marry him because of his too large lower lip. However, when he told her of this and proudly exhibited his new lower lip, her reaction was just as I had expected, but not as Mr. Russell had anticipated. She became hysterically angry, called him a fool for having spent all his money, and advised him in no uncertain terms that she had never loved him and never would, and that she had merely played him for a sucker as long as he had money to spend on her. However, she went further than I had counted on. In her anger and disgust, she also announced that she was placing a voodoo curse upon him. Both Mr. Russell and his girlfriend had been born on an island in the West Indies, where voodoo had been practiced by the ignorant and superstitious. His family had been rather well-to-do. His background was one of culture, and he was a college student. Yet, when in the heat of anger his girlfriend cursed him, he felt vaguely uncomfortable and did not think too much about it. However, he remembered and wondered when a short time later he felt a strange, small, hard bump on the inside of his lip. A friend who knew of the voodoo curse insisted that he see a Dr. Smith, who promptly assured him that the bump inside his mouth was the feared African bug, which would slowly eat away all his vitality and strength. Mr. Russell began to worry and look for signs of waning strength. He was not long in finding them. He lost his appetite and his ability to sleep. I learned all this from Mr. Russell when he returned to my office several weeks after I had dismissed him. My nurse didn't recognize him, and no wonder. The Mr. Russell who had first called upon me had been a very impressive individual, slightly too large lip and all. He stood about 6'4", a large man with his physique of an athlete and the bearing and the manner that bespoke of inner dignity, and gave him a magnetic personality. The very pores of his skin seemed to exude an animal-like vitality. The Mr. Russell who now sat across the desk from me had aged at least 20 years. His hands shook with the tremor of age. His eyes and cheeks were sunken. He had lost perhaps 30 pounds. The changes in his appearance were all characteristic of the process which medical science, for want of a better name, calls aging. After a quick examination of his mouth, I assured Mr. Russell I could get rid of the African bug in less than 30 minutes, which I did. The bump which had caused all the trouble was merely a small bit of scar tissue from his operation. I removed it, held it in my hand, and showed it to him. The important thing is he saw the truth and he believed it. He gave a sigh of relief, and it seemed as if there was an almost immediate change in his posture and expression. Several weeks later, I received a nice letter from Mr. Russell, together with a photograph of him with his new bride. He had gone back to his home and married his childhood sweetheart. The man in the picture was the first Mr. Russell. Mr. Russell had grown young again, overnight. A false belief aged him 20 years. The truth had not only set him free and it restored his confidence, but had actually reversed the aging process. If you could have seen Mr. Russell as I did, both before and after, you would never again entertain any doubts about the power of belief, or that an idea accepted as true from any source can be every bit as powerful as hypnosis.